Now do you see why Court of the Patriarchs Trail is not on any of the hiking maps?
That's because it's not a hike. It's just a straight up to an overlook. It is a cool overlook. The Court of the Patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, named by a Methodist minister in the, I think they said like the 30s, for the, the men of the Old Testament. And here they are before you, and they are quite patriotic. I don't know if that's a word. I just made that up.
Patriarchal?
Patriarchal. That's the word we're going for. I kind of combine patriotic and patriarchal. Anyways, just look at them. They're cool.
We checked off another of Utah's Mighty Five national parks when we visited Zion National Park. It is the busiest national park in Utah, and if I remember correctly, I believe it's the third busiest in the country.
So basically, we went to Disneyworld for the weekend. And we weren't the only ones that felt like that. In fact, we ran into some folks who specifically said, I feel like I was at Disney World. And we had the exact same thoughts because A, it was crowded, it was hot, and you're basically riding a shuttle everywhere and you're standing in line. So basically like going to Disney World.
It's a tough one because you're kind of trapped there with having to use the shuttle. They instituted this shuttle program back in, I think it's 1999 or 2000. I think 2000 was the first year they started running it. And it was because they had so many people and so many cars trying to go up and down the canyon. They call it the scenic drive. And so they instituted this shuttle service that you use. And I think they've done as best they can with it. They run very frequently.
It's a well-organized machine. I will give them that. And yes, the shuttles come every couple minutes. I mean, there's a lot of them. You can get a lot of people on them. But the fact is, you are required to ride that shuttle. Like, you don't have an option.
Well, and a lot of that is because the vast majority of trailheads and things to do are in the canyon itself. And the only way to get up there is if you are on the shuttle. You can take a personal vehicle up if you are staying at the lodge. But even then, you're just up to the lodge and back, and that's it. So you're kind of stuck using that shuttle. So the reason I think that's a detriment in some ways. It helps because it's obviously you wouldn't want to deal with everybody in their own cars. It would be utter chaos.
Well, they said there's only 450 parking spaces in the entire park, and they get, like thousands and thousands of cars and visitors a day, and there's just literally no place for everybody.
So you have to do that. The downside to it is if you want to get to a trailhead, you're riding the shuttle. So if you're out for the day like we were, thinking about doing different trails, you pack everything with you for the whole day, and you don't have your vehicle to get back to. So because it takes too long to get back around if you wanted to go between trails. And you have to factor that in with your timing when you're getting to the trails in the morning.
They say it's a good hour and a half essential round trip. You start at the visitor center, and if you go all the way to stop 9, which is the Temple of Sinawava, and then you go all the way back to the visitor center. I mean, it's a good hour and a half loop to do that because they have to stop at each stop on the way and let people off and then let people on, and you never know how many people are in the party or how much gear you're carrying. So, there's some variables. One thing to keep in mind, and that they have done a great job with, is that there are bathrooms and water available at almost all of the stops. And like I said, it is a well-oiled machine. They've been doing this for 23 years, but it is just something to keep in mind when you go there because most of us are used to just driving our vehicles everywhere and having everything in the car.
And you have to get used to dealing with a lot of people. I mean, we were there in mid-July, right? So it's a peak time and it was hot. But it was a lot of all the national parks we've been to so far. I think this is the busiest one we've been to.
By far, I think it's one of the busiest parks we've ever been to. And again, kind of going back to the Disney World reference, when you get in line for the shuttle first thing in the morning, there's a whole what is it called? Not a kiosk, like a queue, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it was packed and lined up. And we were there relatively early. I mean, we got in the park at about 7:30. The first shuttle starts running at 6 a.m. And so by the time we got in the park, we had breakfast, we got our gear, and we got in line for the shuttle around 8:30. I mean, we had a good probably half-hour wait in that queue to get on the first shuttle. So you have to keep that in mind when you're planning your day, that you're going to be standing around and you're going to be doing a lot of waiting.
despite all of the things you're dealing with, it is still a very nice park. There's a reason it's so popular, or people wouldn't keep coming to this place. It is amazing to see this canyon and to get in there. And, you know, let's talk a little bit about what we did too, because we did some hiking and we did some other fun activities. One that was kind of a surprise for me. I didn't know you were going to do that. So let's talk about it.
So Zion has a lot to offer, and it is one of the busiest for a reason. So maybe different than some of the other national parks is the entire park is down in a canyon. And so that scenic drive is through a canyon. And there's hikes along both sides. There's overlooks. There's the Virgin River that runs through it. So it offers a couple key iconic hikes that you've probably heard of: Angel's Landing, the Narrows, the Emerald Pools, the Canyon Overlook. So there's things that people go specifically to Zion for. And then there's just sort of the rest of the park to see. And it was getting close to be about 110 degrees while we were there. We were all under a heat warning. And so we had to start really early in the morning and kind of knock a few things out and kind of spread out our time because, you know, well, we didn't really want to be hiking at 3 in the afternoon when it was 110.
We actually went to Zion Friday night because we knew it was going to be a long weekend. So we ended up going there and we actually went in and just rode the shuttle. We did the whole shuttle loop just to kind of get a feel for it because neither of us had ever been there. We wanted to know how long it took to get places, that kind of thing. So we'd be ready the next morning to kick off very early before it got hot. And we did camp on BLM land the whole weekend. It was plenty of BLM land out there. There was nothing available in the campgrounds that are in Zion. So we took our van and went out in the boonies like we've been doing lately, which worked out really well. But then Saturday morning, we kicked off really early and we did Emerald Pools. We did all of them because there's
3.
upper, middle, and lower. And we did the whole loop and did all of them, which was really neat.
We just got done hiking to the Emerald Pools here at Zion National Park. There are 3 different ones you can hike to: the lower, middle, and upper. And depending on how strenuous of a hike you want to do, you can choose to do one or all 3. It really kind of matters which end you start from, whether you're starting from the Zion Lodge or you're starting from the grotto. In our case, we had to start from the grotto because the bridge is out at Zion Lodge.
Well, that bridge has been out for a while, and they think it's going to be out for a while. It's going to require quite a bit of repairs to get it open. And so, yeah, what they consider the easier hike from the lodge to the lower Emerald Pools is not really easy. It's not really available.
It's not available right now.
So it's not easy. So you have to go out. Is it Kayenta Trail?
Yeah, I believe so.
You start out at the grotto from your shuttle stop, and then you go across to Kayenta Trail, take that up to the Emerald Pools Trail. And parts of it are pretty steep.
Yeah, there's pretty steep. There's rocks. There's a railing. I'm not even, well, there is a railing, but then there's like a chain link at one point. There's just kind of steep drop-offs. There's, you know, steps built into the rocks. So it is a pretty strenuous hike. And I guess I totally misunderstood how far I thought we were going because I was reading the park map, which is based off going from the lodge, not going from the grotto. So I thought it was only going to be like 1.5 miles. And like our entire trip to upper, lower, middle, and back was 5 miles. And I was like, oh, that was not what I was planning on this morning.
That's even more out of the way than we usually go. We usually add 1 mile or 2 on with no problem. But yeah, we got all done. You were like, that was some 1.5 mile hike. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That was not 1.5 miles. That was more like 4 or 5. And it was.
It was
ended up being 5 miles. So yeah, but it was nice. The trail is, I mean, there's a lot of nice views here at Zion when you're on some of these trails. It's narrow at times. It's busy right now. We're here in mid-July. And there's a lot of people. And so there are a number of times where you kind of have to wait for people either that are slower because they're ahead of you on the trail, or people are coming and going in a choke point and you have to wait and yield to people. And so it's just something you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about the timing and what you're going to do for how long it's going to take you to hike. And because we're here in July, you also have to think about the heat.
Yeah. So far, this is the hottest weekend of the summer. I mean, I suppose it could get worse, but they're predicting up to like the 110, 115s this weekend, specifically here in the park. And so they're warning everybody, you know, extra water, start early. We meant to start much earlier than we even did, but just circumstances, of course, got us behind. I mean, I think it was one of the things is the Emerald Pools is one of the more popular hikes in the park because it is relatively easy compared to some of the other ones. And so it's doable for just about anybody, as long as you take your time, and we saw everybody out there. But I think that's why we saw so many people out there, and it is pretty much a kind of a one-way path out there. So take your time, stop and look at the pictures, ask people to take your picture with the views behind you, because there's a couple good views like where you're looking straight down the canyon, and it is really pretty.
That is neat. Yeah. And, we're always big on sun protection and hats and take plenty of water. Definitely take plenty of water. I think it's interesting here on the maps. They tell you take plenty of water and drink it. Like you have to remind people to drink the water. Because it's so hot here today and we started early in the morning, really. I mean, we got, it wasn't real late by the time we got going.
At 9:30 or so.
9:30. You got to be here early if you want a parking spot for the shuttle. But, the other thing I noticed is we both ended up doing cooling towels today, which we don't always do. So it's hot when we're pulling those out and getting those wet. But that's just something to be aware of because it is dangerous if you're not careful about it.
By the time we had wrapped Emerald Pools, which was getting to be about noon at that point, and it was warming up fast. And so we knew we weren't going to do a whole lot of hiking the rest of the afternoon, but we didn't want to miss out on a couple things. So we rode the shuttle around and went and stopped at a couple quick stops, Court of the Patriarchs and Weeping Rock, just to check out those scenic sites.
We're on our way down from Weeping Rock where we just hiked up. It's not really a hike, it's a walk.
It's a walk. It's on a paved trail, but it's like straight up. Like it's only a quarter mile, but it's literally like straight up.
I think it should count as a hike.
Okay, we're counting it as a hike.
Counting it as a hike. It's really pretty up there. It's really neat. It's a strange geological situation. It's called Weeping Rock. It's because the water comes down through sandstone. Then it hits harder rock that it can't get through as easily. So it goes sideways through the sandstone, path of least resistance for water. And then it ends up coming out the side and it kind of weeps through.
Yeah,
and
it's like a constant little just trickle waterfall like coming out of the rock in this little like cave thing.
Yeah, and there's enough water. I mean, there's plants, there's hanging plants and all kinds of stuff growing up there. It's super unique, especially since, Zion Canyon is technically in a desert. So
it's cool to have this nice, cool oasis, not only visually, but just it's a nice reprieve from the heat too, to go up there and sit in that little cave and you can kind of get some little drips on you.
You might huff and puff on the way up, but there's plenty of space up there to just kind of sit and relax and enjoy the view and take your time and then wander back down.
We're now mid-afternoon of our day at Zion, and excessive heat warnings were in effect, and so we didn't really want to be outside anymore. So we went to the museum to check out the movie about the park and to see a ranger-led program, which was kind of funny because in the middle of our program, the supervisor came out and told the ranger that was giving us our hydrology lesson that he had to stop because he was no longer allowed to be outside because of this excessive heat warning.
Well, it was 105 degrees in the shade. And so that's when they said, you really need to cut this talk short.
So we did a quick wrap up. We let him, we wanted to hear the rest of the presentation. So we finished, asked a few questions, and then let him go on his way. And at that point, we decided we pretty much had enough. So we kind of headed into town and decided to go to dinner because we needed to find some cool air that was not out in the baking sun because it was only getting hotter at that point.
I will say the museum was nice to get some history on the park, and the ranger-led talk about hydrology was super interesting, even though he cut it a little bit short. It's where you found out that the water coming out of Weeping Rock, that you ended up getting hit by some of the water that was dripping out of Weeping Rock. And he said it's quite possible that was like 1,200-year-old water.
Yeah, 1,200.
Yeah.
Not like 12 days, not like 12 months, 1,200 years old. And here I am the whole time we were up there thinking, oh, this is just from the snow melt that Utah had this winter and this, and that it was a heavy snowfall and it's filtered through. Oh, no, this water has been in this rock for 1,200 years, meaning the snowfall water won't be seen for another 1,200 years. Like, that's just crazy. I don't understand how that works, but that's just crazy. And it was still really cool.
After you heard that, I felt like you wanted to go back up there just to go stand in it some
again
more.
And be like, I want some more water.
I want some really ancient water to hit me. And then we went to town and we did dinner, and then we ended up camping in BLM. Like I said, we stayed that night. One tip, if it's really hot, if you go out the east entrance of Zion, you end up going up in elevation and by like 2,000 feet.
Oh, it's
and it
way
made
different.
A huge difference. So we got down to, I don't know, high 50s, 60 degrees overnight, which was a great relief from the 110.
Yeah, because the original BLM land we had picked out to camp on that night would have been more at like 3,000 feet, and the low would have been in like the 80s. So it was nice having a low of 60 versus a low of 80. It allowed us to cool down a little bit and actually sleep.
It did. And then so we got up the next morning and headed in really early because we had an appointment. It was a surprise. I didn't know we were going to do this when you originally set this up. But we ended up doing the horseback ride on one of the trails in Zion, which was a really neat treat. I've been talking about doing a horseback ride for a while now because I haven't been on a horse in forever. And so we got to do this ride.
Yeah, that was it's sort of an early anniversary gift that, yeah, I know Ari'd been wanting to do this forever and we just hadn't had the opportunity or found one. And so I made a couple phone calls and found out that they had a couple openings left for the weekend and slotted us in. And so that was a lot of fun. It wasn't super intensive. It wasn't like we were climbing like down the cliffs or, I know you can do those things at like Grand Canyon or even Bryce where, your horse is like walking right on the side of the cliff. And this was not that. We were on a pretty sandy, dusty trail far away from the cliff. So it was just nice views of the canyon and the overlooks. But it was very hot and very dusty. That was probably the only downside to it. And that was just happened to be the day that we picked to do it. But I think it was really cool. And it saved us a lot of walking because the trail that we went on, we probably would have hiked. And so this way we got to see it in a different viewpoint. And I think it was really fun.
It's Sand Bench Trail.
Sand Bench Trail,
which is why it's all sandy, I guess. But it was interesting. We commented that, it would have been a really hard walk on our feet in that sand. So it was nice having the horses. Also something to keep in mind, though, if you look at hiking it, that is the commercial horse trail. So we passed a number of hikers who then had to wait for, there was 15, 20 of us on horses to go by and we were kicking up a lot of sand. So if you're going to hike that, keep that in mind and maybe figure out what their schedule is for the horses.
Well, and it's also, you have to keep in mind that the entire trail is kind of filled with horsey dew. So you have to watch your footing as well, if you're walking it. So, I mean, I would recommend the horse. That would be a good option.
I think that was the best way to do that trail. And then we got done with the horse ride, which is something I've been wanting to do. And then we got to check off one of your bucket list items that you've been wanting to do.
For years, I've been hearing about hiking the Narrows at Zion, and it was so exciting that we actually got to do it because the certain times of the year it's closed because of either flash flooding or it's too cold or there's bacteria or there's all sorts of reasons why the Narrows is closed, and there's only a short window of time that it's open. And because it was open, we got to hike it, and I was so excited.
We're standing in the Virgin River in Zion National Park where we just hiked, I have no idea how many miles through river and rocks, but you really wanted to do this.
This was a bucket list item for sure, hiking the Narrows. And it was exciting and amazing and hot and cold and, well, just amazing. And I'm so glad that we actually got to do this.
That was a really neat experience. When you look at everything online about it, it can seem really intense, but it worked out really well and I enjoyed it. And I'm glad you got to check something off your bucket list.
I'd been hearing about this hike for years and on my backpacking groups and my running groups and just outdoor stuff. And the Narrows was always on the list. But because of the conditions, you never know whether there's going to be flash floods or bacteria or it's going to be too cold, or there's a number of reasons why you may not actually get to hike it when you're there. And so the fact that it was open and accessible and we got to do it, and it was 100 and some degrees, so it felt great to be in that cold water. I mean, it was definitely a bucket list item. I think my only regret was that we didn't have all day to do it because we had done the horseback riding in the morning. So we only had about 5 hours to do it, where I would have preferred to spend more time, go slow, really enjoy the time and go deeper into the slot. It's a slot canyon by the time you get up, miles into it. So I still want to go back and do that again. But the fact that I got to do it at all was exciting. While technically you don't need any special equipment to hike the Narrows, there are some recommended items that you should have. And just like any sporting event or activity, the better equipment you have, the more enjoyable the event is going to be. And so in this case, we ended up renting some equipment so that we could enjoy it better, which I think made you feel a little more comfortable because you weren't really sure what we were getting into, what I was dragging you into for the day.
Well, it's one of these situations where you are going to get wet. So, your shoes, your socks, your shorts, whatever you're wearing, at least up to your waist, you're going to get wet. Anything you're carrying on your back is probably going to get wet at some point because there are some areas that are pretty deep. Neither of us is very tall, but still, there's areas that even taller people, you're wading chest deep in. Some people were just swimming. It was easier, that kind of thing, because you're in the river the whole time. So we ended up renting special boots and that have a really good grip, and it comes with neoprene socks, which helped. It was the interesting thing about these boots is they don't get heavy, and that's key. I think if you're going to wear any kind of tennis shoes, hiking boots of your own, what you're going to wear, they're going to get heavy and it's going to get tiring. As soon as you step out of the water with these, the water just runs out of everything and it stays light. And they also give you a really heavy duty wooden pole.
It's really just like a dowel that's been sanded down.
Yeah, essentially. But the advantage to it is, because we have our own hiking poles that we use all the time, but they're pretty thin. And if you get them jammed into a rock or stuck between two rocks, the guy said they could bend a little easier. This thing's not going to bend. So it just made me feel more comfortable doing it that way. And then we took minimal. I mean, we took our small Camelback backpack with the water pouch in it. And I think that was about it.
You definitely don't want to bring extra stuff because it is going to be wet, but you still need to be prepared. So they tell you that the canyon is going to be mostly in the shadows the whole time. And so you're going to want like a long sleeve shirt. And that's both for the cold and for the sun protection, because depending on what time of day you go, if you go middle of the day, there is a chance that it's going to be in full sunlight, because if the sun's directly overhead, it's going to shine down in and it's going to be hot, which is what we experienced on the first half of our trip in. But on the way back, it was definitely in the shade and it was cooler. So the minute that you get wet, because you are hiking through the water the majority of the time, you're not necessarily going to dry off very quickly. So you just have to keep that in mind. But I don't know, I had a blast. I got to swim through part of it because it was deep enough where you could like swim and float, and there's people jumping off rocks. There are parts where you can walk along the side and you're walking on the rocks outside of the water. So I don't know, but it was just cool. I'm so glad that we got to do it and check that, I got to check one thing off my bucket list.
And I would say the whole, walking along the side where it's just dirt or some rocks or whatever, that's going to be totally dependent on when you go, because that water level is going to change constantly throughout the months that you're there. You said you didn't get to go quite as far in as you would want, and you could make that a full day hike. But I mean, we went in about 3 miles, right? And we got to where there's 2 canyons that come together. Orderville Canyon is off as a side canyon off there. It's a really neat side slot canyon to see. We got to see the very beginning of Wall Street. So sort of the iconic photos and videos that you see of the Narrows, we did reach that point.
Yes. Well, it took a few miles to get here, but when I pictured hiking the Narrows, this is more what I was thinking. The steep walls, nobody, the peacefulness, and the river, and just us.
And you at least got a taste of it. And then also, like a lot of places, the further you hike, the fewer people you see.
Yes.
Because it is packed at the beginning.
Oh, it was so crowded. So crowded.
Yeah, but we've been in other places. I mean, I'm thinking back to when we went to do kayaking in Florida and the manatees were out. Well, right around the docks where the manatees are is a lot of people. We got off on a side river and there was nobody. So
by the time
go in further.
By the time we got to Orderville, I mean, there were only a handful of people that had walked that far, because you are, 3+ miles in, despite the fact that my GPS said we'd gone like 14 miles because it totally like lost the signal in the canyon. So it was super goofy, but it was a good hike. I mean, I think we spent probably 4.5 hours-ish, almost 5 hours hiking that. And, and we took our time too. I mean, we wanted to enjoy it. So you can go as far as you want to a certain point. There basically is a section where you have to stop, but like you can go as far as you want or as little as you want and take your time with it.
Yeah, I just bring that up because I don't want people to get there and look at all the people around and think this is going to be the whole hike, and it won't be. It gets much quieter, much calmer, and it was a really neat experience. Like you said, I got to do my horseback riding. You got to hike the Narrows. It was a good way to cap off Zion.
Zion is very popular. It's busy for a reason. I don't know if I would consider it one of my favorite parks. I mean, we've been to so many, and there's so much else to see in Utah that I think is way better than Zion. I mean, there are the iconic things there, but maybe just our style, it wasn't necessarily for us. And that's not even counting the shuttles and everything else. I'm just saying in general, it wasn't necessarily my favorite, but it's iconic for a reason. And if you're in Utah, you should definitely make sure you stop at Zion. You just have to be prepared. You just have to understand the logistics going into it of what you're encountering.
Yeah, logistics is a good point. Really get to know, study it ahead of time, get your maps, figure out the shuttle system, know what you're getting into, bring your patience with you for the people, and enjoy it. Get to Zion. It's one of those iconic parks, like you said, and it's iconic for a reason. So if you get a chance, we're in Utah, we do think you should check out Zion National Park. In the meantime, keep on trekking.
And we'll see you out there.